Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. John Quincy Adams was a man who spent his entire life carrying expectations. From the moment he was born, he was surrounded by the idea that he was destined for greatness. For many, being the son of a founding father and eventual president of the United States would be impossible to live up to. But for Adams, it became the challenge that defined his entire life. From diplomat to president to congressman, he didn't see life living up to his father as a burden. He saw it as an opportunity. This is the story of John Quincy Adams. Let's do this. Born on July 11, 1767, in Braintree, Massachusetts, John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, who would later become the second president of the United States. And his mom was Abigail Adams, one of the most influential women of the founding generation. Growing up, John Quincy was not raised like an ordinary child at all. He was raised with the belief that he had a responsibility to serve his country and live up to the example set by his unbelievable parents. His father, John Adams, placed enormous expectations on him. He believed his son had been given incredible opportunities all around him, and wasting those would be a disgrace. Oh my goodness, John Adams, he's literally 3 years old. He just learned how to walk. He can't be the president yet. Exaggerations aside, those expectations may have created pressure, but they also helped shape one of the most educated and disciplined Americans of his entire generation. His mother, Abigail Adams, played a major role in his development. She constantly encouraged him to pursue knowledge, honesty, and public service, and really built him into a great kid. As a child, John Quincy Adams experienced the American Revolution firsthand. And I'm not saying as an adult, as a kid. He was growing up during one of the most important moments in American history, watching the nation fight for independence, the nation he would eventually serve. At a young age, he traveled overseas with his dad on multiple diplomatic missions, exposing him to the world of international politics before most kids his age had even considered what they were going to do as their career. While Adams was in Europe, he learned multiple different languages. Man, that guy's such a polyglot. Did you just call one of our presidents a polyglot? Don't worry, polyglot is not a slur, it's actually our word of the day. A polyglot is a person who can read or write multiple different languages. While I can count to 10 in French and say a couple of terms in a very southern accent in Spanish, John Quincy Adams was leagues above what I can even comprehend. He spoke fluently 4 different languages and knew elements of almost 8 languages. The guy was a polyglot through and through. These early experiences shaped him into one of America's most talented foreign policy minds. I don't know, because he can communicate with literally everyone. And This continued to prove John Quincy Adams as a unique figure. He wasn't just the son of that famous politician, that president. He was developing his own reputation as an intelligent and a capable public servant. After graduating from Harvard in 1787 and briefly practicing to be a lawyer, Adams entered the world of politics and diplomacy. He served as a U.S. minister to the Netherlands during the Washington administration and later represented the United States in Prussia, which would eventually become a part of modern-day Germany. Throughout these assignments, throughout these jobs, he gained a reputation as a skilled negotiator and a person who placed America's interests above his personal popularity. In 1797, he married Louisa Catherine Johnson, who became the first foreign-born First Lady of the United States. For many years, she was the only foreign-born First Lady until Melania Trump became First Lady in 2017. The marriage between John and Louisa was complicated at times, but Louisa remained an important part of not only his personal, but also his political life. John Quincy Adams continued his rise through American politics, serving in the Massachusetts legislature and eventually as a United States senator. However, Adams was never somebody who simply followed his own party and didn't do anything else. He often made decisions based on what he believed was right, even when those decisions hurt him politically. One of the clearest examples came when he supported Thomas Jefferson's Embargo Act of 1807. Many people in his Federalist Party strongly opposed this policy, especially in New England, but Adams believed that avoiding war with Britain and France was way more important than protecting his own political future. Eventually, he resigned from the Senate because he refused to abandon his own principles. And his diplomatic career continued anyway, when James Madison appointed him as minister to Russia. During the War of 1812, Adams didn't just deal with Russia, he also helped negotiate the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the conflict between the United States and Great Britain. His success overseas eventually led President James Monroe to appoint him as Secretary of State in 1817. Adams eventually became one of the most accomplished individuals ever to hold the Secretary of State position. He helped negotiate the Adams-Onís Treaty with Spain, named after Adams and Spanish diplomat Luis de Onís. The agreement brought what we now know as Florida into the United States and helped settle major disputes between the two countries. Adams also played a major role in developing the Monroe Doctrine, also known as, didn't James Monroe write that? No, we can give major credit to John Quincy Adams and James Monroe. You're welcome, Quincy. The Monroe Doctrine was a policy that warned against European powers colonizing in the Western Hemisphere. Also known as, if you stay on your side of the ocean, we'll stay on our side. This piece was very important and one of the largest achievements of Adams's entire career. After years of diplomatic success, Adams seemed like a natural candidate for president. However, his election in 1824 was anything but simple. It would eventually become one of the most controversial elections in American history. So let me give you the rundown. In 1824, there were four major candidates for president. The four candidates were not part of different parties. They all identified as Democratic Republicans. So the four candidates are Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William Crawford. But it eventually became pretty clear that the top two frontrunners were Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. So they were neck and neck. When the electoral votes came back, Andrew Jackson had the most. Good for him, he would win the election. But it's not that simple. He won the most electoral votes, but he didn't have the majority, which sent the election to the House. Who was the Speaker of the House? Henry Clay. Adams and Clay were just close enough political allies that people began to speculate that Clay, being the Speaker, would push the House towards Adams's direction. Now, there's nothing realistically wrong with that, convincing people to vote for somebody that you agree with. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem came once the election was finished, and the House had given it to John Quincy Adams. Because what did Adams do? He elected Henry Clay as his Secretary of State. The decision to put Clay directly on his cabinet in such a high position made some opponents of him wonder if it was some sort of a corrupt bargain. It made sense that buddies would work together to get themselves into higher positions. And hey, Henry Clay, if you speak really good about me and make me the president, I just might make you my Secretary of State. It makes sense thinking about it. And Adams's opponents were going to jump on that like nobody's business. Especially Andrew Jackson, the person who was a little salty after just losing that election. There is so much in the election of 1824 and the election of 1828 that I can't cover in this episode. But if you want to learn more, check out our Season 2 episode, Corruption and Rivalry, the elections of 1824 and 1828. I go into such detail about that election to make this point. There was already a cloud of suspicion over Adams before he had even entered the White House. Of course his opponents are going to be mad. Of course his opponents are going to slander his name after this corrupt bargain. And after becoming president to a country that didn't necessarily like Adams or want to work with Adams, how would he ever become the larger-than-life, likable, amazing president that his father had always wanted? Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". Franklin Roosevelt was the president for over 4,000 days. These are facts. But you know what else is a fact? The fact that Presidents Unplugged has an Instagram page. If you want presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. That is presidents_unplugged. I'll see you there. Before I talk about the policy that occurred during the Adams presidency, let's talk about a great milestone. When John Quincy Adams entered office, he became the first son of a president to become president himself. And after researching this episode, every time I stub my toe, I will officially be saying, son of a president! It would take 176 years before another son of a president would become the president. When George W. Bush became president after another highly debated election in the year 2000. And if you want to learn more about the election of 2000, check out our other Season 2 episode, 537 Votes, the election of 2000. Unfortunately for Adams, the controversy surrounding his election followed him throughout his presidency. He entered office with ambitious plans for America's future. Great things. He supported investments in roads, canals, education, scientific research, and infrastructure. Many of these ideas were extremely forward-thinking, and future generations would eventually complete many similar projects. Adams believed that a stronger, more connected America would create a better future. But then, why couldn't he complete these things himself? His ability to accomplish these goals was limited by his lack of political support. Many members of Congress disliked him because of the election of 1824, and Adams struggled to build the relationships necessary to turn his vision into reality. His presidency, all 4 years, became the story of a brilliant man with ambitious ideas who struggled in a political environment that was unwilling to work with him. The only person that was willing to work with him was sitting on his clothes. Wait, sitting on his clothes? Okay, let's talk about one crazy story about the John Quincy Adams presidency. Because if he didn't get anything done politically, he's got to have a good story in there, right? And I'll start by saying, just like another Calvin Coolidge story that I've shared on this show before, I want to start by saying there's not 100% proof that this event and setting truly happened, but there's great evidence supporting its reality. A woman named Anne Royal was a journalist and travel writer, and really wanted to interview the president. At the time, no woman had ever interviewed a president before. This would be a big deal if she could get this to happen. So, did she walk up to him at a formal event and ask him the questions? Oh no, that would be too easy. Anne Royal worked into one of Adams's strange daily routines, where he would go skinny dipping in the Potomac River, as we all do, I guess. Instead of asking him the questions like normal, she decided to find where he put his clothes. She sat on his clothes and then refused to get up until he answered her questions. Because who needs clothes to describe the political and economic condition of the United States? I guess John Quincy Adams doesn't. And while the story is kind of up in the air, if it's true or not, Anne Royal is a real person, and John Quincy Adams did skinny dip in the Potomac River, so it does make sense. But the story does fill in to John Quincy Adams's strange daily rituals. But let's get back to his political career. After many disagreements and naked swims in the Potomac River, Adams was not able to accomplish much of anything during his presidency when it came to his original plans, which led him to losing the election of 1828 to his past rival, Andrew Jackson. After losing in 1828, many presidents would have just retired from public life, gone off to a beach somewhere, and played some golf. But John Quincy Adams did the opposite. He returned to public service by winning a seat in the House of Representatives, not with a disputed election this time, beginning what many historians considered the greatest chapter of Adams's entire career. In Congress, Adams became one of the strongest voices against slavery. His dad, John Adams, was the first president who never owned slaves, and John Quincy Adams followed that example, never having slaves of his own. As the nation moved closer and closer towards civil war, Adams became increasingly vocal about the issue of slavery and the importance of allowing Americans to debate and challenge injustice. One of his greatest battles at the time came with something called the gag rule, as in gagging when you smell tuna. During this period, Congress attempted to silence discussions about slavery by automatically refusing to consider anti-slavery petitions from citizens. Adams fought against this rule for years because it was kind of one-sided, arguing that Americans had every constitutional right to petition their government and that slavery couldn't just be ignored forever. His reputation as a powerful debater and defender of unpopular cases continued when he represented the Africans involved in the famous case of Amistad. That case would later become the basis for Steven Spielberg's film Amistad, where Anthony Hopkins amazingly depicts John Quincy Adams. In a fascinating connection between generations, John Quincy Adams defended the Amistad captives in court, kind of like his dad had once defended the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre. Both of these men accepted difficult cases because they believed that justice mattered way more than political popularity. And after 9 post-presidential terms in the House, on February 21st, 1848, John Quincy Adams collapsed on the floor of the House of Representatives. People gathered around him looking in fear of his condition. People from both parties. It shows his commitment to the country rather than his party. Among those watching was a young congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, who had only been in the House for just over 2 months. 2 days later, John Quincy Adams died at the age of 80, ending a lifetime and almost 7 decades dedicated to public service. When we look back at the legacy of John Quincy Adams, what should we remember? Should we remember him as the president who struggled to accomplish his goals and couldn't really achieve anything massive during his presidency? Or should we remember him as the man who helped shape America's foreign policy, the congressman who fought against slavery, and the man who continued serving his country literal decades after his presidency ended? John Quincy Adams' story is not one of a perfect presidency. It's a story of perseverance. It's a story of somebody who believed that public service wasn't just about personal success or popularity, but about using every opportunity to make a difference. From a young boy carrying the expectations of his parents, to an elderly congressman fighting for what he believed was right, John Quincy Adams dedicated his entire life to the idea that serving others was one of the greatest responsibilities a person could have. And while his presidency may not be remembered as one of the most successful, his lifetime of commitment to the United States creates a legacy that continues far beyond his 4 years in the White House. And that is why John Quincy Adams is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about George W. Bush, the second son of a president to become the president. Coming in after a super debated election, Bush had to immediately deal with 9/11, which led directly into the Iraq War, which was then followed by the Great Recession, one of the worst depressions in modern American history. Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, Give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.